Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I am here with my review and rant for Jessica's Guide to Dating on the Dark Side by Beth Fantaskey. So this was a reread for the BookTube Rereadathon Challenge. First time I read it, I gave it 4 stars. This time I gave it 2 stars. And basically I'm going to talk about why. Also, there may be some minor spoilers throughout this video because I'm just going to be letting all my feelings out, basically. So this book is about a girl named Jess who was adopted. And she basically finds out that she is the long-lost vampire princess, and she finds this out when one of the vampire princes, sort of, the equivalent, comes to visit her and is basically like, hey, so we were engaged at birth, get back here. Like, come back to Romania so I can marry you and you can be the queen of the vampires. And the first time I read this, I thought it was like, really just fun. It wasn't like a fantastically complex story, but I enjoyed it. I liked some of the characters. I really liked their interactions. There were some things I was a little bit iffy on, but overall it was a fun experience, and like I said, I gave it 4 stars. So now I'm just gonna get into my list of things that made me angry about this book, and kind of like why it lowered my rating. So one thing that I noticed on this read that I didn't before is that Jessica really, like, she completely abandons like aspects of her personality for the sake of Lucius, the guy. Like, she's on the math team, she's always been really smart, really good at math, she's really enjoyed it, and she stops going to class, and she stops going to like the mathletes like team meetings or whatever. Like, all of her hobbies and interests basically shrivel up and die once Lucius gets here, and not just when he gets here, but like when he stops paying attention to her and she realizes that she's in love with him, then that's when it happens. And that doesn't sit right with me. I also want to address the like body positivity angle, because Jess she's not plus sized. I think she's like a dress size 10, which is like slightly above average, what they consider average. And one thing I will say though, I do appreciate that Jess, it wasn't just like, oh, she's really skinny and she's got big boobs, but she's self-conscious because she feels fat. Like, it wasn't like that. Like, she actually was like curvier like everywhere. And that is something that she struggled with. But it's so like clumsily done. And then something else about it is that she didn't start thinking of herself as beautiful or as even like worthy until Lucius was complimenting her and like talking about how gorgeous she was and how she's like a born leader and she looks like a queen and all of this. And on the one hand, that is problematic because it's like she's depending on this guy for her like self-worth. But on the other hand, like, it would be great in an ideal world if every person could just kind of spontaneously realize their own value and, like, I don't know, like their attractiveness. It would be great if we could all just suddenly realize that we're awesome, you know? But that's not really realistic. Sometimes I think if you have grown up not thinking very well of yourself, like of how you look or of a certain, like, personality trait or whatever, sometimes you do need an outside perspective to, like, shake you out of that headspace, you know? So, like, in a way, I can understand that, but I think it happened way too much in this book. Like, even when Jessica does start thinking better of herself, it's not like a victory like it should be, because it was all Lucius's doing. Like, she had nothing to do with it. It was like, this hot guy showed up and told her she was worthy of his time, and then she's like, oh, well, it must be true. So speaking of the characters, they were all so flat, like so surface level. Even their personality traits felt just like tacked on. Like Jessica, I mentioned that she was like great at math, but it was to the extent where it's like, did the author have anything else in mind for her character besides being into math? Because like she would refer to it at like random points throughout the story, even when it kind of didn't make sense. But like, there were no other determining characteristics about her, basically. Her curly hair and her love for math, which did not stick around once Lucius stopped paying attention to her. Another weird thing about this book is that in a way, it was like super clean, which is fine, like the romance was like very clean, but it made ordinary things sound super dirty. And I've found that sometimes there's like this very specific kind of book with teenage characters where it's like, this is not as, like, it's like not at all a sex scene, but I feel dirty like reading it because of the way it's told, like completely ordinary things. And I'm not necessarily talking about the vampire stuff, because like, even in the older vampire novels, it's always been like very sexually charged and weird like that. But there were just some other things that happened where I'm like, why does this feel like, why does this feel like sex right now? Like, why are you writing it like that? Why? It was very odd. And then speaking of like the vampire lore aspect, which was almost, it was like barely in this book, which was kind of weird. And there's like the question of how much of the like misogyny, like sexism, antagonistic, like controlling boyfriend stuff, how much of that is built into like the vampire character or the vampire lore. And I want to point you to a video that Trisha from Tell Her a Story just did on kind of a similar like paranormal romance book, but it was with werewolves. She did like a review and discussion on, I think it's called Blood and Chocolate, and like it had been a favorite book for a while, and she reread it and she gave it 1 star. And she does such great like in-depth discussion on like when we reread something and we notice like problematic things. And one of the things she talks about is like the alpha male in the wolf pack thing, werewolf pack. So, and that's kind of something I noticed in this, was like, alright, to a certain extent, I can understand that the very, like, old fairy tale, old folklore way that the vampires have, like, grown up can kind of make them see the world in a different way, or, like, treat women in a different way. I can excuse a small amount of that. But this just felt lazy, and it felt dated. Like, this book is not that old. It was published in 2009. And it doesn't feel like it. Like, it was really uncomfortable sometimes. Like, there's this aspect that male vampires get their fangs, like, by themselves. It's like a puberty thing. But female vampires have to be bitten by a male vampire in order for their fangs to grow. Only the females. And again, that was something that was, like, very, like, weirdly sexual. Was like, oh, it's considered an honor for the man's betrothed to be his, like, first bite, or for her, something like that. Like, that was just really odd. Brings up the question of, like, what about gay vampires, but we won't even get into that, because the author didn't. Also, a quick content warning, there is a horse that dies in this book, and I thought it was really upsetting and unnecessary. Oh, that, because I forgot to mention that Jessica does like horses. So she does have another random characteristic that also becomes unimportant once Lucius does whatever he does. And speaking of Lucius, yet again, he was so much more of an asshole than I remembered. Like, I remember reading this a couple years ago, the first time I read it, and I knew he was kind of a jerk, but it felt like it was within somewhat reasonable limits, because, like, he had to start from somewhere for, like, his character development, but, like, rereading it, that didn't happen. He was just such an asshole the whole way through. Another thing I hated about Lucius is that he acts like a petulant child for, like, almost, it's like the second half of the book, almost. And his actions, like, his whiny personality and stupid decisions get lots of people killed. And so it's not just like he's being a brat, but it's like you're being a brat and, like, actively hurting people because you're stubborn and ridiculous. And I could not get on board with that. And we also have, like, the typical bitchy mean girl character who was so unbelievably, like, stereotypical and flat and frustrating. And, like, of course she's like a slut who's trying to steal Lucius from Jess, and even though, like, Jess didn't realize that she loved him until, like, she thought it was too late. I do want to mention a couple of the things that I did still somewhat like. There's this sort of running theme or element of Lucius sending letters home to his, like, vampire uncles, and those were actually really funny for the most part. Like, there's this one rant he has against lentils at the beginning, because Jessica and her family are vegetarians. And there's this one rant he has about lentils that was just, like, hilarious, because it was just so, like, out of place with, like, kind of his character. He just, like, bitched about lentils for, like, 3 paragraphs. It was really funny. So there was some humor. And then another thing is something I feel almost not guilty for, but I'm like bewildered by, and that is that there was still a part of me that wanted to see if Jessica and Lucius got together. Which, spoiler alert, they do. But, and even though I knew that from the first time I read it, I was pretty sure, even though I had forgotten most of the, like, main plot, there was still this little part of me that was like, sometimes when you guys interact, it is kind of cute. Even though there's all these things wrong with the book and wrong with their characters. Also, the ending of this book was ridiculous. Like, this is, like, full-on spoiler territory, so if you were, like, intending to read this, maybe don't watch this part. But Jessica, like, goes to Romania to, like, get Lucius back because he leaves. He, like, lets her out of the deal of the marriage contract as soon as she, like, actually wants to marry him. She takes a plane to his, like, ancestral home and her castle and all of that. And he's, like, suddenly evil and seemingly willing to kill Jessica. And, like, there's a part of you that's wondering, like, okay, is he actually on her side and this is, like, a smoke screen? so that he can actually help her like win control of her like vampire family, whatever. But it turns out like I don't think that is what happened. I think he was honestly like willing to kill her. And like Jessica and kind of the book itself sort of tries to convince you that like, oh, he never would have been able to do it. He said he was willing to kill her to get what he wanted, but he actually wasn't. And no, like at the last possible second, like Lucius has her in his power and he doesn't kill her. Instead, it's like a big romantic moment and he bites her and changes her and they're like gonna get married. And like happily ever after. And it's like, what? It happened so quickly. Like there was no build up, no development. I was hoping it could redeem the book for me because again, I didn't remember much of it. And I was so disappointed with most of it. And I'm like, well, maybe like I remember that the ending kind of turned out okay. And apparently I was misremembering and I was mistaking at least the main character didn't die for like a satisfying ending because this was not a satisfying ending. What happened? So I'm left with the question of like, why did I love this so much the first time I read it? Like, because 4 stars to 2 stars is a pretty big jump. And I didn't read this that long ago. Like, I can't even say like, oh, it was before I started becoming aware of like problematic content or, you know, whatever. This was only a couple years ago. Now, it was before I started my own booktube channel, so in a sense, I guess like I think I was slightly less critical because I wasn't thinking about, like, I'm gonna have to lay out all of the, like, aspects of this book for other people, like, when I talk about it. But it wasn't like I hadn't read books that upset me in this way before. It was just like this one somehow slipped by me. And I don't know what it is, if it was, like, I think part of it may have been because I did not, like, I had not read any paranormal romance, or, like, very little before that point. So I think it was so different from what I normally read that I wasn't as in tune with some of the like problems, like the elements it could have that are really like unhealthy. So maybe that was part of it. I don't even know if it was like sort of wish fulfillment where it's like this hot European guy shows up and is like, hey, you're a queen. Like, I don't know, was there some part of me that was like, oh, I have also wanted to be a vampire princess. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And my camera battery just died, so I think that's a sign it's time to wrap this up. So anyway, those are my thoughts and reactions to rereading Jessica's Guide to Dating on the Dark Side by Beth Fantaskey, from 4 stars to 2 stars. And overall, the reread project, like the rereadathon, has been a really good experience. Actually, I tend to have really good luck with rereading books I loved a while ago, like high school or middle school, even elementary school. Not so much with books I read just a couple years ago, which is kind of interesting. So you guys should let me know if you've had an experience like this where you reread something and you hated it. I hope this review was at least somewhat understandable. It kind of just turned into me venting about all my feelings about this book rather than like a structured like what I thought, but hopefully it was helpful or at least entertaining. Let me know if you guys have read this book, what you thought. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!